Miniature Steam Hacks, Hints and Tips. This is part 28, a compilation of useful information. This part is sheared off in the cylinder, but I'm not unduly worried about that because here is a top tip to remove the ends of broken pipe fittings in holes. All you need is a square file, and you push this into the hole, then you use a backhoe spanner or similar to rotate the file, and because the file has 4 sharp sides that bite into the piece of metal tubing that's stuck in the hole, it's possible to unscrew it, very slowly and very carefully. Whilst rotating the spanner, it's a good idea to keep a positive pressure on the file so that the 4 edges really bite into the tubing, and as you can see, when the broken part comes out of the cylinder, it's still stuck to the end of the file. When I started to undo the bolt, the entire socket came out of the chassis, and here I am refitting it with some Loctite 603. Then all I have to do is just leave it for a while till the 603 cures, and then I can easily remove the bolt, leaving the socket in place. I was very careful on this engine not to shear off any bolts. I really do hate sheared off bolts, whether it be on a model or a full-sized item. There were 2 sheared off bolts on this engine. This is the first one, and this is on the motion bracket where it secures the outer side bearing to hold the expansion link. There was a tiny little bit sticking out, so I tried the pliers, but no, it was in really tight, that's why it's sheared. So I'm going to file it flat and drill it out, and I'm going to do this in a very unscientific way, so beginners, please take note. I would recommend that experts leave the room and maybe go and put the kettle on. Really, I should set this up in the drilling machine, but it's going to take too long. Because there was a very small piece of the bolt still sticking out of the motion bracket, it was easy to refit the outer bearing and then use the outer bearing as a drilling jig to drill out the bolt. I'm using a 2.3mm drill. That's what John said is the tapping size for 6BA. Personally, I think that 6BA bolts are a bit weedy for this job. So I'm going to rethread these holes 5BA, and I think that's a better size. In this clip, I'm drilling the holes much deeper to allow for a little bit of tolerance on the length of the bolts that can be fitted into these holes. And once the holes are drilled, it's time to thread them. This clip's speeded up. I don't normally tap at this speed, and at this speed it may just prevent some viewers from slipping into a coma. And now sit back and relax because it is time for a top tip. In order to perform a hydraulic test on the boiler of this locomotive, the safety valves need to be removed. I need to cap off the pressure gauge and hopefully the regulator won't leak. But the problem is, the threads on these safety valves are no threads we've ever seen before. They're not metric and they're not imperial. And none of the blanking plugs that we have at the steam workshop would fit the threads in the boiler. So John at the steam workshop was about to screw cut some special blanking plugs. That was until I suggested my method, and everyone seemed quite sceptical, but I know that it works. I used 2 pieces of wooden dowel, and using the bench grinder I crudely ground them so that I could screw them into the existing thread in the bushes at the top of the boiler. So here's the principle, and just like a girlfriend I used to have, it's simple. Screw the wooden plugs into the boiler with a pair of pliers. The boiler is already full right to the top with water ready for the hydraulic test, and some of this water soaks into the plugs, and as you know, wood expands when it's wet. So very quickly the 2 wooden plugs become a perfect fit in the holes that the safety valves were in. Then Simon and myself pumped up the boiler to 160 pounds per square inch using water pressure. Most important, health and safety, etc. Do not use wooden plugs on steam engine boilers when you're using steam or compressed air. They're only suitable for hydraulic testing. And the boiler passed its hydraulic test with flying colours, no problems at all. And not even a hint of a leak from the wooden plugs in the top of the boiler. And here's another tip, although it is a little bit obvious. When refitting safety valves, always fit the one that is closest to the spectacle plate first. Because if you do it this way round and fit the one at the front, then you won't have room to get your spanner in. Particularly if, like me, you use a backhoe adjustable spanner. It's just a little bit on the big side. But irrespective of which spanner you use to do the job, always fit the back safety valve first. So with the boiler test completed, it's time to drain the boiler by opening the blowdown valve. But there's a problem. The blowdown valve is completely seized solid, and a greater problem is my hand doesn't really fit too well inside 3.5-inch gauge locomotives. And here at the left hand side of the picture is the offending homemade blowdown valve. It must have been okay at some time in its life, but now it isn't. It's completely, knackered. When I finally carefully removed the blowdown valve from the boiler, the threaded part that goes into the boiler was almost non-existent. How did I remove it? I ground off the top part using a Dremel tool like this, and it took a while and it was very nasty. And when I got the part out of the boiler, I did notice that the threads that went into the boiler had more or less disappeared. This is common in old brass fittings. Brass is not a good material for making boiler fittings because over a long time period, when fitted to a steam boiler, the brass becomes very weak and brittle. To finish the job, all we need to do is fit a commercial blowdown valve after cleaning out the threads in the boiler. My final job at the steam workshop in this video is making a part for this engine. This clip shows the steam test of the locomotive, and I featured this in a previous video. It steamed very well indeed, both the injectors work. There was just one problem: the cylinder drain cocks couldn't be opened using the lever in the cab because it wasn't connected up. That was a simple fix. I just made this brass fitting to connect the push rod to the lever that opens the valves. A very simple piece of plain turning, drilling and threading. And that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found it useful. Please take the time to visit my Main Steam Models website. Click on the section of the website that says Video Playlists. And by doing that, you will find it very easy to find other videos that you may like to watch.